All right, we're live, and also thank you, Alnud W, for the raid of one person. We appreciate you.
Hey, nice.
But welcome everyone to Table Talk, where we talk all things tabletop. Oh, I don't need this background. I just realized. Blink.
Yeah, this isn't a tier list.
I should also change that background. I was not thinking about this. Honestly, I've been thinking about the playtests, and honestly, there's some bits that I'm excited for, and there's some bits that I'm we'll see how it turns out. Mostly Runesmith for me.
You still not as into Runesmith?
I think what Runesmith does is genuinely really good. Is that locked? What the heck? There you go. Like, mechanically speaking, I think it's really good. But there's something about it that, like, when I was getting ready to do my video, I was actually getting ready. Also, hey, what's up?
Hello.
We're doing good. Odinsky. You really enjoy my tier list and analysis. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's I mean, tier lists are always controversial. It was definitely a tier list that people who played a lot of tabletop were like, oh yeah, I get you. And everyone else was like, your list makes no sense. It's upside down. So, you know.
Yeah, one of those.
But when I was getting ready to do my Runesmith video, my eyes just kept drifting off the page every time. I was sitting there and I was struggling to read through it all, and I was like, okay, I'll come back, do it later. I did it, and then I did the video. And
interesting. So I had the opposite.
Yeah, I'm aware. So, you know, I think it's just the fantasy has failed to grab me, unlike with the Necromancer. Also, it's just another crafting class, which I'm not necessarily against, and it's not like it plays particularly like the other ones. But I don't know. When I think of runes, I don't think of like martial crafter. I think of either a more skill monkey kind of class, kind of like the investigator or rogue, or I think of like a magic kind of class.
I'll be honest.
And Zarek, yeah, I keep forgetting your name. I apologize.
This fit my I guess like idea of what a runesmith would be when I heard it, though it's because of Warhammer Fantasy. Because in Warhammer Fantasy, runesmithing is also a thing. It's a magic performed by the dwarves who
you're right, yeah,
it's very similar to blacksmithing, and they are directly like, they forge a lot of metals, imbue it into items, and then hand it off to dwarf like weapon masters who hit you extra hard and it explodes. So like when I was seeing this, I'm like, this is what I know. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I think, honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think the problem's with me. That's
fair.
That's the honest truth. The problem's with me. There's just something about it that just doesn't grab me. I love so much about it, though. Like, I love how they've set up the diacritic runes where they add on to the name. Like, each rune has a name because names are very important, and then the diacritics add like N or sun or dir or something to the front of the rune. And honestly, I would love to see them do more with that kind of idea of like stringing it together.
It's like a extension of the exemplar. You like build a modular name for your character by adding feats.
Right,
which
yeah.
is sick. Like, I love concepts like that because I watch both your videos, obviously, because they're good ways of just summarizing the class I already read. Wanted to check, of course, if you pointed out stuff I didn't. And the bit I always enjoy is the fact that it's like pulling you in even further to playing something in Galarian. It immerses you even harder with mechanics, which I agree completely. They should do more of that. If they have more examples in the future, do that. Because this is how you make a class that forces you to make an interesting character. By like, I'm reading my ability name in a way that forces you as a human being to immerse.
And I think it's brilliant design. Also, yo, Tom of Psionics, what's up? I love the naming convention. I love like the grammatical syntax essentially of it, and I if anything, I really wish they just kind of leaned more into that, where maybe it was like 3 parts. Like maybe you could combine 2 kind of lesser passives and then have like an invocation that you can use to make it, I don't know, like that would be way more cool to me. And I like, it's already pretty cool, don't get me wrong. I do like a lot of what it has, and I think that mechanically speaking, unlike the Necromancer, which I have a little concern about whether or not it's going to feel as good to play as it does on paper, I feel like the Runesmith isn't going to have that problem. Though Runesmith does have some very like, okay, you got to take these feats though, or you're not going to have as good of a time kind of thing, which is not great when a class really has stuff like that. Like Engraving Strike or Rune Singing, I think are the 2 that you really should take early level.
Yeah, that was the one I noticed. Engraving Strike is, if you're going martial, you kind of have to take that. Because, like, that's the one if you're really trying to be, I am an aggressive runesmith trying to put aggressive runes on my enemies. Because that's going to be a really fun playstyle. And there's, like, a lot of really cool runes that do that. And, like, Rune Singing is going to be really helpful with, like, action economy stuff. So, like, I agree. And then when you have, like, those auto-include kind of feats, you then immediately go to, okay, if you have abilities that everybody is going to want to take, then I don't know. I feel like you should probably take a look and see if there's a method of including that in the class itself.
Yeah.
You're freeing up a feat slot then.
Also, Gloria Zoe, yeah, go ahead. Let's hear your take on Necromancy. I'm very curious.
If it's the like Necromancy existing in Galarian, I assume, because in the playtest they seem to be kind of just like, yeah, you're a Necromancer. Thumbs up.
They lean into it, which is interesting to say the least. I also love how in the video I said you get to just make your own corpses, and everyone's like, yeah, it's called murder. So it's like,
yeah,
you know what? Fair. I walked into that one. Good point.
You're gonna like, it seems like you have the 2 methods. You either craft like corpses like as amalgams, I think just from the environment, and then the second one is directly you kill a guy, you make a corpse,
yeah,
and then you raise it. Good job. So you get both.
But yeah, going back to the Runesmith, like Runesmith, I feel genuinely really cool. There's a lot of features that are like that. Like for some of those features, like honestly, that's 2 really interesting subclasses. Like you could have the more martial, like get up, hit enemies, apply runes, kind of offensive build, and then you can have the more like stand back, pure support, kind of weaving and moving runes all over the place. And I feel like, again, the class can just be more in depth. Well, Necromancer, on the other hand, we got Flesh Magician.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, again, it's one of those things where the Runesmith, I feel like, has a lot of potential. I think the art didn't help, you know, this dwarven woman, which I think her armor and everything looks really, really cool. Don't get me wrong. But if you were to tell me like what's the difference between this and someone who's just really kitted out with like a bunch of runes on their gear, I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. The Necromancer lady, who isn't actually like the iconic for the Necromancers, apparently it's a like an example character for representing being filled with like a god's power or something like that, is just so much cooler. And when you put them side by side especially, it's like I don't know, but I legitimately think that it's mostly a me thing, and like I recorded the video a little bit and I was like, okay, I gotta restart this video. I'm already starting off on the wrong kind of vibe, and I'm more happy with how the video came out, but it wasn't still the best because honestly there's just zero hype for me when it comes to the video in question, and or for the class in question, and it's like I can't pinpoint why, because there's some parts I legitimately really do like. I think it's just I don't know. It just doesn't grasp me, and it's just something that like it's like slippery, you know. It's just like, oh, this is kind of cool, and then bloop, on the floor. It's like, okay, I don't know. I wish I could have your enthusiasm for it.
Mechanically, it seems very cool, and then if I want an image in my head of what it does, I'm just like, the Runesmith, Warhammer Fantasy. I like that. And then like I look at all the really fun interactions I can sense from it. Also I see the for Glorious Zote, the idea of why use skeletons instead of zombies or ghouls, since, you know, skeletons are bony instead of fleshy. One simple answer that I see broken down in the Necromancer playtest, at least. My skeletons, because I actually want to play the skeleton subclass specifically in the Pathfinder Necromancer class. All those skeletons are walking fragmentation grenades. That's one very solid upside. The real answer, if it's like a world building question, of course, is fantasy logic. Probably. I don't know. They just you can just probably make more of them and they're easier. Also, I do think a solid reason, because I see a lot of that, like Odin, the big thing I see a lot of, I think everyone is more hyped for Necromancer in general. I am in the rare boat for me with this playtest, where normally for all these playtests, I think everyone can agree, there's one class in particular that you inherently are like, that one, that's the one. I like that. I'm always that. This is the only time they've released a playtest where I'm like, I adore both of these. These both are so sick. However, the Runesmith art is in no way compares to that Necromancer art right behind you, Cam.
Right.
That's the problem. We have peak next to art that is inherently okay.
Yeah.
It's no shade to the artist. I think it is, the design is okay, is very good. I think the pose is a little weird, as we've said many times.
And also time we got a package, so I had to pick it up. But for for the whole like necromancy zombies versus skeletons thing, so I mean, it's all make believe and it's all magic, and so magic doesn't have to apply to physics normally. Like there's no necessity. Also, thank you, Thanton, for the follow. We appreciate you. For it to be like, oh well, you know, like this is going to use the muscles of the creature to kind of help it move. You can rationalize it all you want. If we're just gonna theorize, I think it's fun that way. I feel like there's just more mass you have to move, and it's not like you're necessarily tapping into its nervous system, which, by the way, is probably severely degraded. So you really kind of have to do the same things mechanically to move a corpse than to move a bunch of bones, though the bones have the extra benefit of being much lighter and probably just requiring less energy overall. And
Yeah.
on top of that, reconstruction, you know, zombie's arm gets taken off. It's not like the magic can just slap it on and it works just fine, because, you know, I mean, it could because it's magic, but it's something where it's just like you can chew up a zombie pretty bad, but like skeleton, there's just bones, and they're so like they can be designed to just break easy. So
I always pictured it in fantasy stuff where skeletons are like literally the bottom of the ladder when it comes to like tiers of undead creature. Like skeletons are just the cheapest thing you could make. And then it goes up because like the more body in like biomass essentially you're adding to an undead construct, the more it's going to require power wise. And so if you're like you're a debuting necromancer, skeletons are going to be the easiest thing to find because you can just hodgepodge your skeleton together. But like a zombie has to be a complete guy. But the at least the necromancer subclass, that's the thing I like, because that's the thing. They explode and they fragment, and it's very cool. And I like the idea of just walking skeleton bombs.
I love the flexibility in more ways than one of the Flesh Magician. I like just
it's so fun.
It just like, oh yeah, you just have your zombie like lunge at someone and just like fuse around them to slow them down. It's just like, oh, that's horrifying, but that's so inventive. That's so interesting when it comes to it.
Yeah, it's like it's perfect. Like that's great kind of like very spooky body horror stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But like, man, I immediately was thinking of a really fun vibe of with the idea of wading through like a skeleton army, and I was like, I want to make a exploding thrall, but then build into osteo armaments, because the idea of punching my skeleton to create a giant sword, or like, as someone pointed out, because that was my other idea, to make a gun and just like flip it out, and now I have like a shotgun that made from a skeleton that I just like punched out their spine and have like crafted into a gun, and like a guy wading through my own thralls. And like that sounds so fun. Oh,
and
which
see,
that's a cooler aesthetic inherently than Runesmith. Mechanically though, Runesmith sounds so satisfying to play.
Yeah, well, kind of. I don't know, because so the thing is, right? Necromancer legitimately introduces a new style of play, using the thralls as like the center point of a lot of your spells. That creates a lot of adaptability, diversity, all kinds of things that you can do to make it feel very interesting. You can feel very, very big brain. The Runesmith plays a lot like a caster in a lot of ways. It's just a caster that can kind of prep spells like beforehand on people by engraving them, or apply, you know, the spell to someone. Like if you just replaced runes with like a spell idea in general, it's pretty indiscernible. Now, some of their feats are definitely a lot more flavorful. I love the what's it called? It's not depict canvas. It's like declare or something along those lines. Define canvas, where you just create an giant area that any rune you set can just be applied to as many people as you want. That's so cool, because it can be used for allies or for enemies, you know?
Yeah, the part that I will be like, this feels like I could be a bit more big-brained than a lot of spell stuff, is the idea that I can inscribe a rune on allies and people, and then it is active perpetually until I apply the next rune, and then the oldest fades. It's that concept. To where then you start immediately seeing some of that stuff where you're like, okay, let me start going through the runes, and then you start picturing, okay, I have these allies, so maybe I can combo with this. And then there's some parts, like the one that sent me down a small little chain is the whole double feat chain of runic tattoo, where you can really use that. Well, first, runic tattoo, especially for those that don't know, is you get to pick one rune you know and apply it as a tattoo to your body. And that specifically, that rune does not count for your maximum runic total, but you can do it once per day. You activate it. So at first, with a level 2 feat, you get 1 free rune invocation, basically. First a perpetual effect, and then an invocation. Like, good job. Then there's the second version of that later, Words Fly Free, where once per day, you now can turn that rune on your body into a 15-foot cone effect for the invocation. Or specifically, you trace the rune onto all creatures or objects within a 15-foot cone. So immediately I was like, okay, that now means I can do a 15-foot cone support or offensive effect. What if I do a 15-foot, like, really fun push effect, really fun damage effect, really bad status effect for the enemies? There's a lot of, like, really cool big brain plays you can make every single day. And it's a lot more limited and more containable than some spell effects. But there's a lot of tiny little abilities that I kept noticing and bouncing between. With like every feat now makes me jump down to the runes again to be like, oh shit, okay, how does this apply? How can I use this to its extent? Which some classes do not make me do. This one did. That's why I'm really hyped to play Runesmith.
Yeah, honestly, like I said, I wish I could share that enthusiasm because I genuinely think it's good. But none of it made me feel that way, and I don't think there is again, I think that's a me thing, not a Runesmith thing. Very glad I kept a very good vibe for the video, because outside the video, it's like, I don't know. Oh, Dead Phoenix, well, hopefully you feel better soon. Also, yo, I don't know how to pronounce the first name, I apologize, so I'll just say Pedro. What's up? But yeah, with Runesmith, it's just I don't know. I do think there's a lot of big brain plays. I do think you could play really well, and like my thumbnail indicated, I do think it's a really good buff class. I think there's so many ways they can apply spell like buffs for a singular action, and technically like unlimited. They get essentially unlimited spells, which is really cool in a lot of ways. And I love how, like, some of them are pretty brainy too. The fire rune, for instance, Atrial, allows you to not only reduce an enemy's fire resistance, but you can invoke it to do a good amount of fire damage. And it's like you can literally create fire damage that works on creatures that are kind of resistant to it, because it reduces their resistance, which I think is really cool. And there's all kinds of really interesting things. I genuinely think it's really good, and I think the feats that go with it, like, again, there's so much optimization that really feels like the class feels very well thought through. So I can't honestly tell you why it just keeps slipping off me like water off a duck's back. I don't know. I think what it is it's a really cool sounding class that just doesn't really offer really a unique mechanic at all. It just feels like a more lesser magic in a way, because they're not gonna have the same effects as magic spells, but they're not limited by spell slots. And so that's kind of like what it feels like to me. I think is nothing about the class is very play style defining. Like, I feel like there's a style of Runesmith, and the class doesn't really do anything to like give you multiple options, unlike the Necromancer got.
Which I think, conversely, as we've talked about just our own opinions on the many classes, the fact that there isn't a defined Runesmith style and it feels very like build your own Runesmith is the part that makes me immediately way more into it. I really like, it's the reason I really love Fighter as a class, as I've been discovering, is like it just dumps of a lot of feats at your feet and then is like, all right, bye, and then like closes it. It's like when you're handed the Lego tub as a kid, and then it's like, have fun, and then shuts the door on you. That's what I want in a class a lot of times. And would it be cool if there were some like subclasses that give you like some fun effects based on like playstyles? Or the one I actually completely agree with is defining what traditions of rune magic you have. That would be very cool.
I agree. And like I think that would make me more hyped, is like seeing different styles of runes and like really creating a vibe for each style of rune to make it be like, oh, like, again, Necromancer, I could see playing multiple different styles of Necromancer, but Runesmith, it feels like you play a Runesmith with just different feat choices. And I know that kind of sounds like it's splitting hairs, because it's kind of just what it is for the other way as well. But the class doesn't really do a lot to define playstyles. Like, it's got some melee capability, but most of what it does is just like affects runes, does rune thing, you know. And I think that's what it is. It just seems like a runesmith is a runesmith, while a necromancer could be a flesh magician, or, you know, I don't even remember the other. I remember like osteomancer, but that's not the name they put in.
It's like bone shaper and
spirit
shaper. Caller.
Yeah, and spirit monger.
Yeah. Like I honestly prefer the fact that it's just wide ranging, because then it just kind of extends so much out, and I can look at all of these and be like, I'm not picking stuff based on like what it's going to benefit me more. It's like, okay, because I am this, therefore like I'm going to get these minor benefits, like whatever, like that. Like I can just look at all of these maybe, and then make a character, a guy that is a runesmith, and then work around that. It appeals to me a lot stronger, because every time I look at a rune, I'm immediately like, ooh, depending on the party, that could be so sick. Like I immediately like look at Zok Rune of Homecoming, and it gives whoever you inscribe it on a 15-foot status bonus to their speed, but only when their movement would end closer to you than when they started their turn. You know, a little bit situational, but great. And when you invocate it, they teleport right next to you. Imagine giving that to like one of your party members. That'd be really helpful for someone who's like naturally slower. That's such like a great support use. Or
agree.
Someone that gets like pulled away like relatively often, someone who's not very good against like grappling effect. Your friend gets grappled, isn't good at like escape checks, so you just can teleport them back to you if needed.
Yeah, like I agree. Again, like mechanically, it's very interesting. They got some very cool runes. I love a lot of like the lore around it. There's so many things that I think are really interesting, but I don't know. Like I said, and I'm not looking for like defined play styles, but it's not. It just doesn't feel like there's many different ways to play a runesmith mechanically speaking. It's like playing a spellcaster. It's like you're just using different spells, but at least spellcasters a lot of the time get subclasses or some other kind of feature that allows them to differentiate themselves somehow. A runesmith,
you just pick different feats, and then you just make the character. It's like, are you leaning more into upfront offensive runes? Are you more backline trying to help your friends? Are you using range stuff? Because isn't there a feat to inscribe it on a like ammunition?
Well, see, that's the problem though. You learn a metric fuck ton of runes. You learn 13 runes, which is a lot, and it's
great.
It's great. No, yeah, I think the diversity is a good thing, but end game, there's not going to be many differences between, at least in the playtest, your list and someone else's list, you know, because there's only so many runes, and like there's 19 in the playtest, and you get 13 of them, potentially 16 if you take the various feats that allow you to do so. So, you know, it's like I get what you mean. Don't get me wrong. I understand what you're talking about. You like having the variety. You like thinking of the different ways you can use runes together, and it does matter the order in which you select them, because you don't get all your runes right away. So like I get all of that, but if I were to compare like Runesmith to a real class that just has so many different tools and toys and things you can play with, like Kineticist, you know.
Kineticist is like the biggest class in the game. That feels a little unfair.
Well, kind of. Like, despite all that, Kineticist really isn't necessarily better than other classes if we're looking at individual to individual, you know. Like, a Kineticist who's decided to be a tank isn't necessarily going to be a better tank than even a heavy armor warrior or fighter, let alone like a champion. But the class is very, very diverse and can do a lot of different things. And that's kind of the thing. What, like, I see Runesmith definitely as being a really good support class with some really interesting benefits and spells and such. But a lot of them feel very specific for very specific scenarios, and their invocations just feel like kind of lesser spells in a lot of ways. So it's like, again, what's the difference between really the Runesmith and a spellcaster? Because a spellcaster can buff too, you know, just not quite to the same degree. And I think like that's the benefit of the Runesmith is it gets some really good buffing effects, like the one that lets it, I think it's like Verdurus, that lets it makes a weapon do persistent bleeding damage while it's engraved with that rune, which is really good. And then you can invoke it to slash an enemy nearby, like the very words coming out and slashing that person. That's really cool, and that buff is really strong actually. But it definitely doesn't match up one-to-one to like a spell in invocation or in like passive feature. The benefit is you can just set it up early, or just one action, touch someone, bam, now they have this effect until, you know, the end of your next turn. So I don't know. I don't know. There's just I think it's good, genuinely.
I think the part that sets it apart in my head more from like playing a caster, because like, yeah, casters buff and you can do a lot of cool stuff. One of the parts that sets it apart from my head is the fact that a lot of these runes have a persistent effect just by applying it to somebody. Like, you just etch it on and then boom, now there's just an effect that will be there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, there's a lower level one that's really, I think, really handy if you're trying to play a tank, just either on yourself or a friend. The +1 circumstance for shields. That's always handy to AC. And then if you use the raise shield action, then it persists for an extra turn.
Yeah, and they have feats dedicated to that actually, because they have one where when you raise your shield, you can, well, they have one where you can just you raise your shield and you can put a rune into it, and it can be an offensive rune that activates when you shield block. Really cool.
Even more if you want to give another method of extra tankiness, there's an even cooler increased feat for a rune, level 9 rune, granted, so you're going to get it later, of just by slapping it onto somebody, the rune of observation, you just make one of your friends or yourself immune to flanking.
Yeah, like, I saw that one too.
Or in a 20-foot emanation, if you're fighting invisible enemies, which is the part where it's like, this is more situational, but the permanent effect is always like, which is what I like. I like that there's a permanent effect for a lot of the runes that are situational.
Well, so pseudo-permanent, because when you invoke them, they go away. But
exactly, but at least like if you're in that moment of like, okay, for like my preparations, this didn't come up, but at least we got like this effect that was helpful, so I didn't waste a rune. Like, that's the part I enjoy. If you're fighting invisible enemies, they become concealed instead of invisible, and if they were concealed, they are not concealed for 2 rounds, and that's like very helpful. Mm-hmm. That'll just, for 2 rounds, like that is most of an average combat in Pathfinder.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think at the end of the day, the main reason why I just haven't been excited about it is what the Runesmith does feels rather God, I had the word and then I dropped. I'm very tired. It feels unrecognizable from like the difference between it and a caster. You know, like the Runesmith just feels like a caster. There's no real mechanical difference. They can just do different things, but they operate mostly the same. And
I at least can't see it that way. I don't know.
I mean, what's the difference? Tell me.
Not casting spells. You're not spending resources to do it.
Well, yeah, not spending resources, sure. But that's more of a, like, different casters spend different types of resources, and cantrips are technically unlimited. And a lot of these runes actually have at least cantrip level damage.
Like, they do like little bits of like 2d6 on average. Some require some saving throws from enemies, but others like can do some, I would say, some increased effects. I don't know, like, if anything, I would say this class feels a bit more like, I don't know, like Thaumaturge level. Like, it feels like a class with some magical more effects to it, but I just get a lot more martial with extra little abilities slapped on top of it.
I mean, yeah, when you look at like all the feats together, sure, if those are the feats that you even end up selecting. But like what I'm talking about really is like, okay, Thaumaturge, good example. That class has very unique mechanics compared to many other classes. It has super empowered like one-handed weapon attacks. It just amps up single-handed weapons a lot. But two, its main thing is like recalling knowledge on an enemy and kind of weaponizing recall knowledge, which is very interesting. Something that most other classes really don't do. We hit the end of the list, that's why. But the Runesmith, like, they use a manipulate action. Their runes are magical effects, and they're not magic per se, but can be affected by things that affect magical effects. It just the main difference is that you can one action them if someone is close, and like they have a little bit more, but like again, mechanically speaking, it's not about necessarily. If you told me there was a spell that did something similar, I would believe you, because they work very, very similarly.
Yeah, I like, to that extent, maybe. I don't know. I can get more what you're saying with that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just it's the difference, I guess, we have with the framework we're looking at with what we want out of classes.
Well, yeah, I was actually going to say this earlier, but maybe I'm just cursed with knowledge. I've worked so much with the game in general and look at a lot of different things that, like, I'm just going to have a perspective that differs from someone who isn't as necessarily in the weeds of it. And so
I mean, I get how these classes work a lot too. Like, I'm not as like deep into like caring as much about how all the mechanics are all. Like, I get how these classes mechanically operate. I think the fundamental difference in the end still is when we both look at a class, we're trying to get something different for like what we want out of the fun of it.
I don't even think that's necessarily the case, because we can agree pretty much on everything on Necromancer.
Yeah, like our opinions align on this. I think it's just largely the part that I get a lot of the fun out of Runesmith is like, I'm being handed the Lego box. That's exactly what I want. The idea that like I can be super down for the idea of like Runesmith getting subclasses that like give them some little fun effects of like tradition runes, but if the subclasses would, like, I don't know, hard define more playstyle stuff, I would be a little disappointed. I like the idea that it is a build your own Runesmith.
I mean, almost no classes are very like strictly differentiated based on their subclass choice. Like, the worst being technically War Priest and Cleric, or Cloistered Cleric, because one sacrifices some of its spellcasting potential, which does mean that you're just not as good with certain types of spells. But they both are Cleric in the end of the day. I don't know. I'll use a good example of a class that I think is very similar, which is Alchemist. Alchemist feels very similar in a lot of ways. You can use whatever, formula you have at any given time for a wide variety of things, whether they're, giving people buffs, attacking people outright, even healing people in some way or form. Not only that, but you can alter said formulas so that they do different things or operate in very different ways. Like, they're very similar in that very broad scope of things, but the major difference is that the Alchemist has, one, it has subclasses that can very much change how you would like to play. Like, a Bomber Alchemist can still be a healer. They can still make the elixirs of life, with their quick alchemy, if they so choose to. They just get benefits to using bombs specifically. And it's the same thing for, like, the mutagenist. And, like, the mutagenist, I feel like, has a lot of very similar effects. The Drakeheart mutagen, more specifically, you get a big bonus to, like, your AC and stuff like that. And whoever has drunk the mutagen can activate it to, like, move really fast and then lose the effects of the mutagen. Like, very similar to how the Runesmith overall works. But I would say that the two differ in the fact that Alchemist feels like it's offering you playstyle choices, while the Runesmith is just it's just giving you the runes, essentially, is the only thing. And it's like, you could argue that Alchemist gives you the tools, which are the alchemical formulas, to do more or less the same thing. So, I'm not trying to convince you that Runesmith is bad. That's not the point.
No, I don't think you are either. I'm not trying to convince you Runesmith is good.
Well, and that's the thing. I think it's great. I actually do really like it. I just don't find the class interesting is the problem.
Yeah. That's me with multiple classes, to be fair. Like, that we both have classes that we look at and are just like, there's always that one where you're just like, meh. I at least see it with the method. I think Paizo will do this sometimes with classes where if they're going for having, like, a lot of just options, they usually don't give it, like, subclass stuff. It's kind of the vibe sometimes I see. And another way I at least think of it is, if say, for some random reason, the choice comes down to me or the community, and they're like, listen, we've heard your feedback. We have two options, because it's a page count situation. We can either add subclass options for, like, giving you bonuses exactly like you're describing, or give you guys some a couple more fun feats we came up with and more runes. I'm gonna go with option 2, because that appeals to my sensibility and my, like, what I find fun in a class design, because that's what I want.
Yeah,
I understand why people, and, like, you specifically with your argument you just made, I think it's a very fair point and very fair things to want. Well, my playstyle likes the second option a lot more.
Don't get me wrong. I think you're misinterpreting my argument. I'm not demanding subclasses. I'm not doing anything like that. In many classes, there are even just feat lines that you can select that really give the class a very specific feeling, type of thing. And while this one kind of does, it's melee options, or just be a runesmith, like, just be a buffer / offensive caster kind of thing. That's also that you get up to legendary class proficiency, and you just use class DC essentially like a magic caster uses spell DC. So it just doesn't feel like it's offering anything mechanically interesting. Like a kineticist is interesting because fighting with Protector Tree, being a wood element kineticist, makes you incredibly tanky, and it feels very, very fun. While going something like air gives you lots of big like area attack abilities and the ability to fly, making your character very free flowing and high mobility and stuff like that. But Runesmith, many of the runes don't really even do that much interesting things outside of combat, which is also, I think, really tragic. Because
if they added some more of that, I'd be also into that. Same goes to Necromancer. I was seeing some people point out that it'd be kind of fun if we had some utility out of combat thrall mechanics, or at least options for like a necromantic familiar kind of vibe, which I agree with.
And so it just, like, every class kind of just has that thing where it's like they have the tools, they have a lot of different things they can do. You know, spellcasters have spells, which are essentially like runes, just different. You know, they're just not a constant buff that you can then use an action to activate, you know, a different ability at the cost of the buff, kind of thing. Which I do think is interesting, don't get me wrong. It's just that's the angle I'm coming at it. It's just like, I think mechanically speaking, the Runesmith very minorly tweaks some already in-game stuff and doesn't really offer very strong playstyle choices other than just you're a Runesmith, you have the runes, use your runes however you want kind of thing, which offers very little direction for players who are like trying to actively use it. And I don't think it's wrong the way you're looking at it, which is I see the potential in the runes and I want to look at the combinations and I want to imagine the scenarios of when I would use these runes and stuff like that. I think that's good. I think most classes should have that kind of thing as well. But I don't feel like the options the class currently has, at the very least, really gives you actual like battle goals or anything like that. It just feels like you have various spell like abilities that do certain things. Like, I like how it can buff, the way it can add damage to people's weapons and such. That's really cool, and it can do so very easy and at no cost, which is very, very cool. And that's what makes me like, that's an idea that's exciting for me as a runesmith. Or conversely, in the opposite direction, I like the idea of a runesmith who's just someone who's just engraving runes on their gear, and they're just super kitted out in combat and then can utilize that, you know, to their advantage during combat as well. Especially because I was a little annoyed when I saw that they needed a hand free to trace, but then they have various feats that kind of get around that aspect of it, because
thankfully
I'm tired of one-handed weapon classes. Like, I'm very, very tired of one-handed weapon classes.
Yeah, can we get more two-handers? Can I like use just my finger extended off of a big two-hander and just trace it like that, please?
You know what's super ironic as well? Spellcasters can cast with their hands full, but a runesmith can't.
Like, come on, man. Let me just like, I don't know, wiggle a finger around. Let me do all this. Which is why it sounds like the, you know, smacking someone with a melee weapon is kind of you should just take that level 1. Yeah. Which is also why they should probably look into the idea of maybe just baking that into the class. I don't know.
Yeah.
That feels like if you're going on a class that is reading into it seems very combat focused, though I at least hope they're giving us in playtest. I wouldn't be surprised, because both classes kind of feel like this, very combat centered in like everything they're giving us, Necromancer included, of course. Maybe that's just what they want to test. Maybe just having that ability become a base level like class feature wouldn't be that bad. because I don't know. I can understand if they don't feel the need to test all of the like out of combat utility stuff with us, because that feels like it needs less, like significantly less tweaking than like all the combat balance stuff.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. I don't know, because traditionally most of the playtests beforehand have had pretty much like most, like 80% of their kit in the playtest with some alterations. Maybe a little bit less if we're looking at something as expansive as the Exemplar was. But most of what you see, and to be fair, like Pathfinder does have just a very consistent trend of making classes mostly combat orientated with many of their feats without too much consideration outside of that. It's hard to say for sure, especially because at the end of the day, a lot of people play this game for its combat elements and not necessarily its roleplay elements, which is something that I understand but don't necessarily agree with from a design perspective. I feel like more classes should just have out of combat things that they're particularly good at. And that's why
I think so too.
I always call out, like, I like how the Runesmith is better at crafting runes. I feel like that's legitimately interesting. And I wish it was something that was just more commonly found in some of their class designs, especially during the remaster. It's sad that a lot of them kind of went out of it. Like, some classes don't need it. Swashbuckler gets so many like skill proficiencies and bonuses to use of skills. Heck, they even get their panache bonus outside of combat eventually, which makes them really good at whatever their style is. And like the rogue, of course, can just do a lot of things, same as the investigator. Heck, even like the inventor has a lot of roleplay reasons to be tinkering and stuff outside of combat. But there's also a lot of classes that just, unless they're doing a job specifically, like the ranger, they don't really have anything else outside of that. Like the ranger's just like, we need to track someone, get the ranger on, but the ranger doesn't have reason to do anything else outside of combat. So, the Runesmith, between these two, funny enough, has that option a little bit at the very least with the whole rune crafting thing. But even then, it just doesn't feel like... Maybe it's also just because the Runesmith lacks spell utility, which is what I like to prioritize more than anything. I love spells I can use in interesting ways outside of combat, or even like inside of combat, but they're not inherently like very offensive capabilities. I think also for Grayson, I do see this. They are actively playtesting the playtest in Society Play right now. So your local society is probably allowing the use of these during the playtest.
Which is good. I was wondering if that'd be a thing they allow.
They mentioned it in their announcement, and they usually do for most of the playtests. You get to play around with them.
I just don't know anything about Pathfinder Society. Like,
yeah, of course. That's fair.
Yeah, I because I'm thinking, because I think it'd be fun if there was more reason sometimes with it to have all like some of your rune slots open, for example. Because I immediately was like, think about how cool a rune would be if like it acted a little bit like a breaching charge. Like it does damage to an object, and like maybe you could do like either you inscribe it on a person and they do some like hardness damage, like maybe they can damage somebody's armor or shield, play with that effect, and if you invoke it, it will actually damage an object more. And I immediately was picturing like, all right, boys, let's breach and clear, and you inscribe it on a door and then invoke it, and the door explodes.
Yeah, see, if I saw stuff like that in the playtest, I would actually have been a lot more hyped in general, because that creates a very specific image and it sounds really cool.
Like if there's more of that, that'd be very, very fun. And I think you know, adding some cool out of combat things would for both classes would be my biggest feedback in the playtest of like there are elements that I think would be really fun to play around with outside of combat with both of these because Necromancer, for example, I was reading through some other people's thoughts on Necromancer. It popped up on my feed. The one that was really funny was like, what's my incentive to summon a lot of thralls? Like I just don't see it. And I was like, I think you just haven't read the class. Like I'm gonna be honest. There's like a lot of incentive. But then the other bit I was reading through was somebody saying like, I wish there was also some incentive maybe to like have cool thrall abilities outside of combat. Maybe like you can have some form of familiar, or like you can have some cool little abilities around, like just use my necromancy in non-combat roles, because then that just gives you opportunities to have to deal with like necromancy in roleplay.
Mm-hmm. And you know what? So, I mean, I want to talk about necromancy a bit because that's been an interesting topic as well. But let me finish off by saying, like, I think Runesmith is good. I think my problem with it is mostly like my own inability to get into the idea of this particular Runesmith. I don't think there's anything wrong with its mechanics. I think it's genuinely interesting, and I do legitimately think it's probably going to be the best buffing class in the game because it just is it doesn't have to spend resources. It can do so way easier, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play, or to have someone in your group play, or whatever. And I do think that there's a lot of opportunity for some really cool roleplay stuff with it. So hopefully, you know, there's some more. I think Alex is right. The class is really, really cool. And don't let anything I say dissuade anyone from trying it out. I think it's genuinely a good class. I don't know. I'm doing my best to try to describe why I feel like it's not hitting for me personally. But necromancy. So necromancy is very interesting because traditionally in media it's always been viewed very negatively or misunderstood, because I feel like there's also like a lot of good necromancers that show up in media as well. But the idea, and like for society play specifically, it feels very, because society play very strictly has a no evil characters kind of rule, so that people don't just come in and try to wreck the game, essentially. So necromancy is very interesting because, you know, most of the time it's just seen as like a weird breach of the natural world, you know. It's just like, oh, those corpses are moving, that's kind of weird and scary. Yeah. And that's kind of like it. Other than the fact that, like, also the real fantasy of being a necromancer is having a literal army of the undead, and so it's like they make really great villains for that very specific reason. I personally don't feel like there's any reason why people would look at a necromancer as anything other than just a weirdo who uses death magic, which is a little weird. It's just like, how can you be a flesh magician and be like a cool person, you know? Like, you're obviously psychotic or something.
Yeah. Like, why is that the magic you chose? Is, I think, a fun vibe to pick. And I like that seems to be the direction they're taking. Like, reading through it. Like, there's a small little tidbit, and I wonder if it's the thing they're fully intending with the attitude in Galarian. And I hope that's the attitude some people try to pull if they're trying to run necromancers in Galarian, with GMs especially. I like the ideas written in Others Probably. The idea that they're assuming necromancers are very like, that you're like a creepy weirdo who like dances in corpses and like you just love the idea of decay. But also the fact that people are just genuinely uncomfortable with the idea that because you're a constant reminder that mortality is a thing. Mm-hmm. But also the fact that there is like almost quietly, like a taboo almost. People will seek out necromancers, almost like there's you can have that scene in a movie where like, haha, look at this necromancer, haha, go play with your corpses, and like the one guy lingers and like walks quickly back to the necromancer shop and is like, hey, can you quickly like send a message to like my mom on the other side? Like I want to know how she's doing. Like that idea. Like it might be looked down upon, but there's still people who believe in it because it's a thing and might like look to it for some form of comfort. I really like the others probably assume about Necromancer section in this. I like how they wrote it.
They typically do a pretty good job overall. Even though it's a section I typically ignore. It's
this is the one I didn't ignore because we both were speculating how would they handle necromancers in Galarian.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they're just straight up necromancers, you know.
Also, tactical breach wizards, dead phoenix. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great pull.
But I think one reason why I think we vilified necromancy so much in media is we have as a species an innate dislike for death and decay because it's dangerous. It's, you know, potentially lethal to be infected by some kind of bacteria or something with dead bodies.
And you'll see this in any species that actually has like a higher level of intelligence. There's a large amount of species with higher brain power that all practice some form of respect for the dead and like burial practice. Like elephants are actually a great example of this. This is not just in humans, because there's just common knowledge that the dead will get you sick, and it enforces a thing in brains to respect the dead, or else something bad is going to happen.
Also, Necrodancer and Argidful.
That's another great pull.
It's something that, like, logically speaking, it's like when you play a Necromancer in a game like Baldur's Gate. Who's gonna care if the bandits you are fighting, you know, get reanimated and used against the other bandits, right? It's just, that's just your combat style. That's just how you use your magic. There's nothing really that weird about it other than the fact that, you know, the possible the possible stress of someone having to fight their undead companion, and that's kind of a little messed up. But most of Necromancy isn't necessarily about that aspect and just using bodies in general. So, you know, it's something where I don't think that there's legitimately a problem with a Necromancy. It's just something that's like kind of like you said before. It's kind of just breaches a taboo of messing with the dead, which is something we just don't like, because again, the reason why Flesh Magician is just so gross is because of that innate like idea of decaying bodies are gross and nasty and full of disease. And I mean, that's why so many other games have disease zombie builds, or, you know, like Path of Exile 2, for instance, has a contagion zombie build you can go with if you really want to. It's something where I feel like it can be represented in Galarian very well, which is people don't like it. One, because Pharasma is not a big fan of undeath in general, and a lot of people are, if anything, afraid of Pharasma as a god. And also, undead things are just kind of icky, and, you know, they don't want you getting them or their children or whatever sick using your corpses around town. It's like, oh yeah, you had a battle. And sure, you know, there's just now a few more dead bodies than just the bandits on the street, and they were already in pretty advanced decay. It's not great, you know. Or you flesh tsunamiing people, you know, using the liquefied remains of corpses as a weapon.
Classic.
I'm just saying that, like, Necromancer is nasty, but it's fun in that way, in a fantasy sense. I don't know. I feel like characters in the setting like NPCs do have a valid reason to dislike necromancy, but I don't think it's necessarily like necromancers are evil, they're messing with the way of things and blah blah blah. It's just like, are they really? I find that a zombie is much not that different than like an elemental, other than hygienically speaking.
Yeah, it's the idea of I think the big difference that changes a concept between like, is the necromancer evil, is the idea of are they putting like taking a corpse and like the soul of a person and pulling it from like another, like the afterlife or whatever, and animating that, or are they animating essentially like you said an elemental effectively? Like, what is the difference there? Because one of those is a lot worse, morally speaking, I would say. Like, you are prolonging a concept of suffering and using that as a tool, and the other is like, yeah, that's just a meat elemental. Good job.
So,
that should be a kineticist.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of very interesting things with this potential playtests and the implications of the book in general. I'm excited to see it, legitimately. And you know what? If we're going to be getting new artwork, I mean, losing the Necromancer will be very, very sad. But maybe they'll get some more inspiring Runesmith art. Because, like, I'm a dwarf fan, like many others out there. But this is such a... It just doesn't speak Runesmith to me. It just speaks very kitted out fighter or champion or something,
Yeah, like I like my image that I have in my head of where I keep saying is the bit where it's like, yeah, it's like Warhammer Fantasy. It's like, that doesn't vibe Warhammer Fantasy. I don't think that's what they're going for, but there's some similar concepts. And that's where I can hit my like concept. The Necromancer is a lot stronger of an art piece, which I'm very happy that they hit. Man. So, yeah, I hope they update the art stuff. That's gonna be one that's gonna be a lot better.
Yeah, and I think we're now looking down the barrel of 30 plus classes in the game. I'm always excited to see whatever new things Paizo really tacks on. I think they've done really well to keep things pretty fresh for most classes. I feel like most classes have generally a place in the game, and I feel like the Necromancer and the Runesmith are no different. The Necromancer is, a very interesting way to play an occult caster, and I feel like it does the job really, really well of being like the embodiment. Like, Psychic is the other like pure occult caster besides Bard, and Bard already has a very strong image. Psychic, both Bard and Psychic aren't very like occult-y, if you ask me personally, in theme. They were given that way because they kind of just are outside of the normal vibes of the other traditions, and plus Bard is like a homestay, so it's this one feels like the real occult caster, which I think is really good and very interesting, and something that I'm very much looking forward to in the game. And Runesmith, I think, offers a very fun way to play with the different buffs and buffing their team beforehand, essentially with the engravings and all that kind of stuff, and really trying to get the most out of the use of their runes. But I do wonder, like, is there a limit to the classes? Is there a point where we're just gonna get like a class but a different flavor of said class? And like, is there other ways Paizo can implement their design to improve the game other than just adding more classes?
I mean, I imagine if they feel like they're getting to that point, they're probably just gonna start adding more class archetypes, or like they're probably just gonna be adding other things. So if we ever get into an era where we feel like, man, we're just getting a lot of class archetypes, huh? A lot of like we're in a new class drought. I feel like that'd be the silent call that like, they just haven't come up with classes that like change the game at all.
Yeah, I don't think they'll ever really get to that point.
I don't think so either.
I think as a general, like, one, they only come out with so many classes a year, or like typically two, sometimes more. I feel like for the foreseeable future, we have a good amount of time before that they would come to that, and we might even be looking at a Pathfinder 3rd edition. Even though I still can't imagine what a 3rd edition could even look like. I don't know how they could change the game any more to like warrant a new edition. So, maybe we'll see. But we've been like here on the channel, we've been playing a lot of different games. We're trying to anyway. A freak storm blew out one of our players' power, and it's like one of the last sessions, so we didn't play this week. But we've been playing different games like Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. We played Vampire. We're going to be playing maybe Rogue Trader in the near future after Plague Watch starts. And Plague Watch is also just going to be a very different kind of Pathfinder game, being mostly homebrewed and with a very different kind of TTRPG take. And in our free time, we've been playing like Fabula Ultima, which I love that game. And I really am starting to see that, like, I love Pathfinder 2nd edition. It's still my favorite TTRPG currently, but it kind of lacks more narrative potential in a lot of things. Like, most of the things in the books, like, they have a lot of lore and they have a lot of interesting things, but I want narrative mechanics, not necessarily lore. I want things that affect out of combat stuff, exploration mode based stuff. I want more things like that, and Pathfinder might not be the kind of game for that kind of stuff to really flourish, because it's such a deep, intense game. Imagine trying to balance the narrative gameplay of the classes on top of the combat aspects of the classes. Like, my tier list is completely pretty much based on that. It's just, how is the character good in combat versus how are they not good in combat, and that's kind of where they placed on the scale. I don't know. I feel like I'm very hopeful for things like the Stormlight or the Cosmere RPG, because I feel like it's going to be a style of game that it got a good mechanical flow and feels good to play, but also has a lot of like out of combat narrative, even backstory based mechanics that affect how you play as well.
Exactly. The bit that I'm most excited for, obviously, is the fact that like they directly hired people who made one of my favorite tabletop games ever, the Fantasy Flight Star Wars game, which has that just in a different avenue. And the only flaw I see coming from this game is that it's a D20 system, and
Right.
and we're both like, we like D20 games, but we're also like, this dice system is not our favorite. And also, it's very clear if you watch some of the interviews, the devs themselves are like kind of wishing they could have made a funny dice system, because they're always like trying to make something weird and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The plot dice system itself in that game is going to be really fun, I think. And just the inclusion of that being very integral to, all right, time to introduce a narrative device. Boom, does something good or bad happen? Is really funny.
Yeah. And I don't know. Especially with playing Path of Exile 2 lately, like Path of Exile and GG as a company in general are really good about adding more games to their game. You have so many different ways you can use a lot of the same mechanics to play very different styles of the game that have very like similar goals. Your goal is to kill the monsters essentially, but you do it for certain different types of end goals. Like there is a tower defense version of the game in Path of Exile, the first one. And there is like time-based trials, and there is like the boss encounters and fighting like the uber bosses. Like that's very different than just clearing maps and getting gear in general. So I feel like tabletop really needs to start looking at how to gamify more narrative-based elements to really bring back the narrative aspect of TTRPGs that has always been kind of the core of the hobby, even though that's not necessarily a lot of people's focus in the hobby, as I can tell by everyone's utter, befuddlement about where I placed Fighter on my tier list video.
Yeah, the bit I'd be curious about is like there's some real fun methods that like gamifying a lot of narrative elements will come out, because there's been games with some good narrative combat stuff. In fact, I mean, Cosmere RPG is actually going to have that as well. Like from what I understand, it's not as complex as like actual combat is going to be.
Well, yeah, I don't think it should be either.
Yeah, I just know that from what I've seen, a lot of the fans of Rules Light who are like, hell yeah, I can just tell a story and role play. I wonder how much they're going to be fans of like a gamified narrative system. So they're like, ugh, there's all these rules in my narrative. And then the combat players who are like, ugh, narrative, I'm just going to ignore that. Where's my dungeon? But like there could be fun methods of like actually doing it. Like I think I want to see more methods of like gamifying a lot of systems, which is where I'm so excited for the Cosmere game, because every method I see of them gamifying like skill check encounters, because they have the method that they made for like, I forget what they call it, like the situations, like the crisis situations, where helping GMs like craft like, okay, you want to break into a manor and steal this, here's how you craft that. Like a set number of difficulty like checks, like there's 4 difficulty checks you're gonna have to make in this sequence, and then all you have to do is like talk around it and role play it. But mechanically speaking, it is 4 skill checks. Here you go. Breaking that down and gamifying it like that for a GM to understand, that's so helpful. Oh my god.
I mean, they did that in the Star Wars TTRPG as well.
Exactly. Like, I think just breaking that down to people is going to be really eye-opening for a lot of GMs. And also just that's a good way to like show it. And then I want them to actually show off a lot more of their rules, but we gotta wait because it comes out in September.
And yeah, Rising Star, we actually did do a playtest for them. It's actually on the channel for Daggerheart. I think they're what's it called? It's not positive negative, it's like hope and or something. I can't remember. I'm very, very tired right now, as I mentioned before. I think it's interesting though, kind of similar with like Fabula Ultima. I'm not necessarily a big fan of forcing improv on the GM or the players, and mechanics are like, all right, something kind of bad happens, here's a list of examples of what you could do. Like, yeah, sure, you could do the examples every time, but that's not like what they're intending. They want to give you the examples so that you can kind of use those mechanics yourself. But when it comes to like role-playing games, most people are not really good at improv. They need a moment to think. It doesn't flow super well, and players are very like objectively minded. It took a few sessions of Fabula Ultima for us to finally like get away from the idea of using your Fabula points to edit a scene for just like in-game advantages, and doing more to give yourselves interesting story moments. And like various people's skills are gonna make a big difference on how a particular game works in a system or not. Daggerheart, I like it because they also do have some gamified uses of those dice. Like some mechanics work if you roll like with one result or the other. But there's also just a lot of situations where it's just like, oh yeah, and then here's a moment where you can improv for your own fun thing. And like, to kind of come back to the prior point we were talking about, I feel like not enough TTRPGs motivate the players to actively like want to search or investigate the world or to do a lot of things. I like Gloomhaven is such a fun game, even though it's super hard, because your actions, the things you do in the game, can make some pretty substantial differences on how the game overall comes out. You can unlock items, characters, or the like through how you handle some of the events that occur in that game. It's really cool, and it makes you want to go out and to do another dungeon so that you can get more loot for the town and make a better character or level up or whatever. And games currently, it's just like you want to go on an adventure because it's going to make you level up, and that's kind of part of the fun. But there's no reason for your characters to really want to do that kind of thing other than just some arbitrary like, oh, you got involved with a plot, you have a MacGuffin, whatever. I feel like more TTRPGs need to add things that like gamify actually your players going out and doing things. Like, you know, whenever you explore a dungeon, maybe it has some narrative effect on a town you're in or whatever. I just want to see, because we see this in video games all the time, and I don't feel like there's a good reason not to do that stuff for TTRPGs for anything that isn't, you know, overly complicated and requires a lot of computing on the back end. So it's something that when it comes to tabletop in general, I feel like we're really just starting to stretch our legs. We're starting to kind of like get ready to take off and start running in a great direction. We're kind of getting out of the battle gaming phase, and we're starting to move more towards the narrative gaming phase, which we kind of already had something similar before back in the golden age of tabletop in the 90s, where a lot of games were coming out at that time, and they were kind of evolving away from like just being dungeon crawlers to being more like narrative based, like the whole White Wolf games, the World of Darkness stuff, where like, but here's a narrative game. And I think that there's a lot of stuff like that currently happening right now. It's something that we're starting to see, like Daggerheart is starting to kind of play around with some of that a little bit. The Cosmere RPG, I think, is also going to start playing around with that a little bit. These games there's games out there that already exist that are very, very narrative focused, many of which we have still yet to play, even though I've been really wanting to. There's Hearts. Is that the one? The Flesh one?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, something like that.
Heart.
That one sounds really interesting. There's also, you know, everyone knows the the Apocalypse, or Powered by the Apocalypse, or the one they use for Blades in the Dark, whatever that engine is. Like, heck, even the other game produced by Darrington Press, the what was that game called?
Is it the other Lancer ones that are coming out? There's the
No. Is the Critical Role one.
Oh, Candle Obscura.
Candle Obscura. There we go. Like, that one is essentially like Blades in the Dark, very much more narrative focused, all that kind of stuff. But we're just not seeing enough narrative and gaming being blended together in ways that I genuinely can exist in our fun. Because, like, I do that for my players all the time. I gamify narrative elements all the time, and they genuinely like it when that happens. In Mutants and Masterminds recently, we went through like a whole research mini game where the further they got into researching, the more things they were able to do and discover, and they were able to get things out of that. That was really fun. That was really cool.
Yeah, there's like a lot of elements that you can do that, because I mean, it's the method that I keep looking at with Cosmere RPG, because like I'll say, when you're actually leveling your character, a lot of the abilities you're going to be getting on base are going to be combat focused, because like that's just granted going to be what a lot of your stuff inherently for games will be. If you're going to be in a game that's going to have combat in it, you know, like a lot of your base abilities were going to be combat. The difference is there's a lot of non-combat focused classes that are doing actions in combat that are not like, I'm not swinging a sword at you, but I'm doing very beneficial effects around that can also then more than likely be used out of combat or swayed out of combat. There are then the magical effects that can also be done out of combat as well for very good effects. The part that I personally very, very enjoy is the idea of if you actually want to level up your radiant path, as it's known as, which you can do 5 times, like maximum, you have to say the words to level it up. And as a mechanic to level it up, you can actually do this whenever you want. And like you have your first radiant ideal, that's like the base level. Then you have your second one. And whenever you say it, you are basically infused with max mana, and you can then, you're just empowered. So you can do this mid-combat, but the game just tells you, hey, you should save this for a moment that is narratively cool. Or don't. You could save this for a joke moment. Because there is a character in the Stormlight Archive who just, his perpetual joke is he keeps ascending at moments that are narratively funny. And he gets even more upset that he keeps like finding these epiphany moments and then ascending when like no one else is around. And like that's just a bit you can do. And then, or like in a moment of a boss fight where like you're about to like die and you can say the words and then boom, you're just healed and you're like empowered, and then like, I'm ready, my character arc is fulfilled. Because you have to say when your character is mentally ready. That's how it works. Like mechanically, it's like you're not stopped to do that, but you should like withhold yourself. And there's like more elements with that, because the part I really enjoy about how this game and the Star Wars RPG does the narrative dice, where it's like, all right, an effect happens. They give you two sets of options, because I think players inherently, whenever they're given, all right, you have a positive opportunity. When you're given that, the first thing you have, especially when you're in a combat, is I want to make something actually gamifiable and beneficial for me to happen in this moment. The game will give you a table of options to pick for like what you rolled. And it's like, okay, here you go. Here's just the options you can take that are really, really good. And then if it's like out of combat, it's like, it encourages, all right, just discuss GM to player. You guys should just figure out in the moment what are effects that can happen and let the player like decide. Like just start workshopping effects that can like occur, and then the effect that it intends is for the player to go like, okay, I think based on what I'm doing, can this happen? And you're just like, yeah, that can just happen. Sure. So like that's the part I think it can work out very well based on the narrative effect for the opportunity, just like allowing a scene to be altered or changed, and then having a lot of tables that it's just going to give you for like, here's inspiration, please, here's so many tools to help you improv.
Yeah, I mean, like improv is at the end of the day always going to be a very intrinsic part of tabletop. I mean, you know, you're role playing as a character. You're not reading a script, so you're going to have to come up with your own things on the fly. It's more of like, I want it, like what Psionics is saying here, that like Pathfinder offers a wide variety of systems for downtime activities and stuff like that. Yes, but no. Yes, there are rules for a lot of things, like, you know, buying buildings, we're playing Kingmaker. We have a whole king-making based thing, which, by the way, is terrible and runs terribly. But it does exist at the very least. But a lot of it boils down to make a skill check. You know, do a skill check, or spend in-game time doing this thing, or, you know, do a skill check. But if you do something clever in the game, you can get a bonus to said skill check. Trying to add elements to a game. And the thing is like, whenever that happens in a lot of people's games, the players don't really interact with it all that much. I can't tell you the number of times we've played where, like, the players had a base and that was kind of like, oh, that's cool, and that was it. That was all that was really ever used out of it, you know, because it's really hard to add to a game a feature that just doesn't exist. You can't add a mechanic if the game doesn't provide you anything to, like, actually do with said mechanic. And it's something that can be easily remedied by having actual things where it's not just dependent on skill checks, you know, alternate forms of playing the game, and things that don't just rely on the players coming up with a very interesting way of, like, how the outcome of a thing is. The tabletop is really, really bad about providing a lot of success to very little skill. There's a lot of things you can do, or your characters can do, that really doesn't require any specific effort from the player playing it. You can be a really just like a player who barely speaks every session, is only there to, like, roll dice, and your character will get powerful both, like, by their class and by, like, the sway in the world they're in, just kind of by being present in the story. And that's fine. I think tabletop's been working up until this point because that's generally fine, but that's not necessarily interesting. There's not really sub mechanics that force the players to actually have to think about what they're doing, how they're going about things. Like, there's not a lot of failure points kind of baked into a lot of the adventure paths, which makes it where players kind of coast through stories. And I feel like tabletop doesn't need to be baked or based completely around just a narrative, like a end goal. This is the story of the, you know, whatever relic held by whatever evil character that needs to be stopped. I feel like tabletop can be done in a way where the players get to explore the world and experience new things, and adding reasons for the players to actively do so, mechanically speaking, is really interesting. I think it's really fun. Lancer, I think, does it pretty well because you essentially get paid, quote unquote, per mission you go on by getting more licenses. And so it's like the level up mechanic in Lancer is not based on getting XP, killing enough creatures, doing all that kind of stuff. It's going to a mission and coming back alive, which is great because that just makes the players motivated to, like, oh, we gotta go find a mission. We gotta go do a thing. They want to do that because they want to get new parts and try new things. But, like, tabletop, you get rewarded for literally everything nowadays. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. I'm not saying take away XP from just everything. It's just something that I feel like there can be more interesting game mechanics where players can build onto their characters without necessarily directly contributing to, like, their stat sheet in a way. I don't know. It's something that, like, hasn't been done a lot and hasn't been, like, one of the best ones I can think of is the Blades in the Dark, like, building up your base of operations. That's a very fun part of the game. You make it where you can do certain kind of missions easier and easier. Candle Obscura has that as well. Actually, you get certain kind of benefits for upgrading your base in certain ways. That's really cool, and that's something that like motivates the players to do certain things or invest in certain things. But tabletop as a whole mostly doesn't have mechanics like that. And what mechanics we do have, I think, are pretty shallow.
Because I'm thinking, because I know this is a discussion we've had a while ago on TableTalk about this subject. Because like it's something that I think is seen in a lot of games with like some simple like rules light mechanics, and then they're always very like tiny elements of games where it's like, okay, then we have this upgrade system. It's like a general party upgrade system, or a very quick XP system. Because like in Lancers, that's like a very accelerated milestone system.
Right.
And it's like, okay, let's make a crunchy version of that. And the idea of slapping that down in front of a GM sounds like it could easily become a nightmare. If it's a video game like a VTT automated or even a CRPG, then it's easy, because then it's a back-end system doing it for them. Like in pen and paper, doing it yourself, oh man. Or it is solving a problem for people that aren't motivated by a narrative. Or like, because I don't know, I at least am sufficiently motivated by like the plot I'm showing up at. That's what I'm motivated by. That's because I like the narratives I'm showing up to be fair.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why you can have a range of games and different things, but it's I think it's very valid to say, like, but I like the stories. I like being a part of the adventures and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's completely fine too. Like, again, tabletop has worked this long because that kind of formula already works. But I think a lot of people really do want to like get immersed in a setting. They want to really, like, the best way I can really put it, and you mentioned the whole GM thing as well. Path of Exile, I've been using this a lot lately because it's just super relevant right now, but Path of Exile is really great because on the surface it's just kind of like a Diablo like ARPG, but the more you dig into it, the more interesting mechanics you come across, and you learn that there's just a lot more to do. Can you just run through the campaign and then be done? Yeah, for sure. That is a part of the game. But you stick around because there's a lot more. Compare that to Diablo 4. And it gets a lot harder to really justify playing much more after the campaign. Like, you get your character sufficiently strong enough, and then you're just kind of done. But Path of Exile, like, you're leveling up maps, you're leveling up different mechanics, and you're discovering these things in the way. And I feel like you can have tabletop systems that you only use when the players decide to look into it. You only use the base building when the players decide they want to get a base. You only use the blacksmithing mechanic if a player is trying to, create items and stuff like that. But that gives players the option to opt into these kind of things rather than just, having to improv it. So you said, like Alex said anyway, that you plop that all down in front of a GM and then tell them to do it. It's like, that's not what necessarily I'm talking about. I'm talking about keep giving us the option to use different things, giving us more tools for when we want to explore more in a game, do more things, opt into certain kinds of features, because in the end of the day, no one can tell you and your group how to play tabletop, and you're going to do whatever. You're going to break the game, make up your own rules, all that kind of stuff. What I want is the option, or the actual like other game modes to actually be there. I want to be excited to play tabletop because I want to progress some system or something, not just I want to play tabletop because I enjoy role playing, because I do. I enjoy role playing and I enjoy the act of playing like Pathfinder 2nd edition. But what would make me enjoy it more is if there was like a thing we could do that can make the game funner if we do that thing, you know? So I don't think it has to be more complicated to have those options available.
I don't think it would have to be. I'm just saying, like, it would either... I think you could make a very good modular release system, because it sounds like you make a very well-made core engine and then release a lot of supplements, because the alternative is you have the most nightmarish core book in existence.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Like, you could make a very good, like, online release system, like a very good, like, archive of Nethys, even, with like all of your supplement rules you just keep releasing, like, hey, we release this, all the rules for this mechanic and this mechanic, if you want this thing. Because I think you could do that, like the Path of Exile system of like, hey, do you wish this system was here, or like we had a base rules for this, but do you want it way more complicated? You can opt into this and like have it be build your own tabletop in like a very well-made core engine. That'd be kind of interesting.
Well, I mean,
cool.
We kind of already have that. That's why there's so much homebrew for D&D after all. I mean, you've played in a game that has had system upon system kind of overlaid on it over time.
Yeah, and that's a way I'm at least picturing like what you're asking of a like a system of opt-in mechanically, but then the idea of it is built by a team of well experienced designers, a core team of designers, instead of like the disparate bands of homebrewers, so they all feel very different and like a kind of hodgepodge, because they're all by different people with different levels of skill. Because if it's by one core group and then it's like built and released and set out as they finish it, so I think that'd be very realistic, at least set out, is they create something like that and then, you know, release, there's some new classes every once in a while, then like boom, we just made a crafting system that, like, you like the old crafting system, all right, here you go, nerd, it's more complicated and you can get more out of it.
Yeah,
have fun.
I would love that. We
also made an inventor class. That'd be fun if people, like, if people wanted that, that'd be sick. I'd probably be into that too if like the core system of it worked and was really fun. That'd be very cool.
You know, it's just like, I want a good reason for my character to actually want to go hunt down a dragon, you know? Because, like as of right now in Pathfinder, you go hunt down a dragon usually because the story tells you. Or maybe the opportunity comes up and you're like, yeah, dragons have, like, hordes or stuff, or their body parts are, like, worth a lot. We can get a lot of money. That's really cool. But, like, I would like a mechanic that's like, hey, so if you do this, you go hunt a dragon, here is a very fun system that's going to level up your guys' level of play. And that's like, oh, okay. We have to go hunt a dragon, guys. Like, we have to. These things are really, really cool. There's also, I feel like there's just a lack of non-combat related rules, which I understand it's hard to make rules around, like, things like conversations or some other narrative based elements, because, you know, if it's not a skill check, how do you do it, you know? I think there are definitely ways that can be done, and I would like to see more reason for the players to, like, actively engage in more creative parts of the game rather than just the combat. Because combat really is the only part where, like, so many people are very tied to combat because that's where it feels like their character gets the most ability to do things, you know? You get to do a lot of different things in combat. You get to move, you get to attack, you get to buff, debuff, you get to possibly turn enemies against each other, you know? That's all really, really cool. When it comes to, like, a conversation, you get to roll a skill check, maybe a few, but none of that is a strategy or anything. It's just what came up on the die. So it's just all kind of luck in the end. I feel like there definitely can be something more where you can actively do things. Like, I've played games that have a social combat system that are pretty interesting. Not necessarily something I'd use for a tabletop game, but that there probably is something out there. There's a conversation we've had before. It mostly just came up because like, Paizo's been releasing a lot, and I really am always surprised by what new things come out in a book, what new interesting ways we can play the game. And I think the game is genuinely really fun. But the reason why I would go to play another tabletop game is just because usually it offers some different mechanic or style of doing things. Like, legitimately, Vampire the Masquerade is really fun, not because of the combat, because, I mean, there is combat, but it's not that interesting, but because the game puts a lot more emphasis on social aspects. Who you know. The point
of any of those White Wolf games, or, like, then Thief 5 is not White Wolf, but the point of any of those White Wolf games is, like, they're not about combat. Like, that's not the point.
Yeah.
I like how Hunter the Reckoning was described to me, for example, because the game feels a lot more like you're playing Scooby-Doo, for example, where it is a tense encounter where you are first investigating what you're hunting for a while, and then you're setting a trap for the thing you're hunting. The trap is then sprung, and then it's, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, oh god, as your trap may or may not work. Your plan, probably something bad happens, and like nothing ever goes fully to plan because you might have gotten something slightly wrong in your like research, because it's the supernatural. Nothing fully makes sense. There's no full logic to like what you're trying to do, and it is a tense, short encounter that's incredibly deadly. And like, is it super deep mechanically? No, that's not the point. It's everything else. And like, that's where the fun comes in, is like the combat isn't there for you to get like tactical choices. It's there because that's what kills you. And that's the danger. That's the threat.
And yeah, and like, I feel like there's a lot of ways that you can have, like, for instance, maybe a bit of a hot take, but I believe a party can be TP or should be able to be TPK'd not by combat, but by other story elements, you know? The players should be able to fail the story in not combat ways. Because if combat's the only thing that matters as far as like keeping the story going, then yeah, of course, players are going to prioritize having really good combat characters. And I feel like because there's so much investment in tabletop, and because getting your group together and everything is so difficult and is not very consistent, people are so afraid of difficulty in tabletop to the point of kind of even just not even having death be an option a lot of the time, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. It's more of a game I feel is more interesting when how you play really matters. And if how you play doesn't matter, I feel like it's something that makes me at least fall off. Like, we played Monster of the Week for a while, and I really liked that game. I think it was really fun. We had a really fun story, but at the end of the day, how, you know, what choices I made for my character, what things we made for our characters really didn't matter, because it always just came down to a dice roll of like a skill. And you know, like, I definitely did things I think that were good and that were interesting, but I mean, I'm working hard to try to find a weakness for an enemy, and another player can just punch them real good because God says they're good at it. And
yeah,
you know,
exactly. And like, Yeah, because it depends. The death one is always a thing I find really interesting. I sometimes I think there's like the balance. Because I also conversely see a lot of people who are always really too weird aggro about like, no, kill. And I'm like, okay, listen, there are people that are too afraid to have death in your game. And then there are people that are like too annoyingly weird about like killing your friends. And it's like,
right, yeah,
you should talk to your friends. You should just talk to them maybe and like see what your party wants. It's like death. Because I don't know, I like I'll speak for my own method of how I play. For me, I can take it or leave it. If I'm in a game where death matters, I will play with the exact same level of investment. If death didn't matter, if my character will be there for the entire game and be revived and whatever, I will play the exact same way as immersed. The only thing that will take me out is if the GM is running a very poorly made story, if the GM is making very poorly like ran decisions, is being unfair, and is doing a lot of things like that with the narrative and the actual like rulings and stuff. That's what rips me out. Or even other players doing that. So, if the narrative is pulling me out, then I will probably be pulled out. Death never comes up with that. Because I don't know. Sometimes I am super into the campaign where like we are a party of like found family or friends that like pull together and solve evil. And then sometimes I like that there's the struggle and some are lost along the way. Because I've had both campaigns that have that, and both campaigns have done super well. So like, it just depends.
Yeah. Well, and that's again, like my argument wasn't death is important. I was saying there should be other ways you can lose. I think
there should be.
I think that there is something. Sorry, someone said something. All right, can we get your opinion? What has more flavor, a cleric that focuses on necromancy or the necromancer class? Sure, it's up to each player, but what feels more flavorful to you?
Necromancer.
Neither. Also, necromancy is like not a school anymore. So, are you a cleric raising bodies? Are you acting like a traditional necromancer? Or are you just referring to necromancy spells, which no longer exist?
If you just mean like, that's actually a better point. If you just mean like base design wise with like the abilities you're using, like necromancer is going to give you the more like as mechanical, flavorful options. But like, I think a better way to think of it is probably like, what character are you playing and how much of a necromancer you're bringing to the table.
Yeah, the question's kind of weird because what has more flavor, being a necromancer or a cleric? Necromancer, because that's what they're designed to do and have the fantasy for. You're just a weird cleric otherwise, like if you're a cleric focusing on necromancy, then I guess that's something your god wants you to do, which both can be valid. So I guess my answer is neither, both. It really depends on you.
Yeah. Though it's always the bit that I find genuinely interesting, is because I always find it, and I like the conversation we had a long time ago on the idea of death and tabletop. I find it so fascinating why death in tabletop is always like the thing that is like, okay, we have to keep it in, or like death. If my character doesn't have permadeath, it means that my choices don't matter, which is like, all right, fair enough. I understand that. The reason that I have a block personally is, okay, does that mean at least that if you're playing, say, a video game, like an RPG with like some very cool mechanics and stuff, does not playing in permadeath mean your choices don't matter there?
Hmm.
Because, like, what is the difference?
Well,
Genuinely speaking, I don't see the difference.
I do, because the difference is, uh, one is a game that you can, experience by yourself, and that's kind of the only thing that matters. And the other one's a narrative experience with other people. A death, you know, has as much meaning as the group decides it does. Some groups are perfectly happy being able to just revive at a church, and you yourself said that it
Yeah.
really just depended. So, like what is the difference? Whatever the table decides at a given point in time, because both have happened. It mattered in tabletop, and it also has not mattered in tabletop.
Yeah.
So it's not really a great comparison to a video game, because in video games, it would be really bad if you just couldn't play the game anymore, because that's the only thing that could like even come close to mimicking the same effect, kind of.
Well, it just means you can't play that character
Or
anymore, and you have to start
that
again.
character, which
That's what permadeath does in those games. Your save is deleted. Start again.
So, like, I think what a lot of this kind of really boils down to is there's not a culture around tabletop based on what happens when the game, ends prematurely. The whole culture of tabletop is you're telling the whole story. How does it happen? Like, the assumption is you're getting through the whole story in some form, or you're getting to an end point. It's not ending unless everyone decides it's ended,
or everyone TPKs in some way, like, because I don't know. There is genuinely because I saw this in discussion when that Final Fantasy TTRPG came out, the Japanese one, where they had the multiple methods of handling character death and party death, where one of them was just having respawn, like you respawn at a checkpoint, and there's a lot of people who were like, "This is awful. This is the worst mechanic ever." And when I was hitting that, I was like, "Oh, we straight up talked about that. Like, you should talk about having like respawn mechanics." Because when I think of it, I'm like, why is that a bad thing? And because like I see people when they're like, no, death is integral in tabletop. If my character cannot die, then I cannot get stuck in. Anyways, I'm gonna go play my RPG and have respawn. It's like that to me, there is a disconnect there. Like, I cannot connect with that. Like, my intense narrative RPG without permadeath. It's like, I don't know. I personally am of the opinion that like death is whatever. Like, I do not find any form of extra immersion at the concept of my character having permadeath or not. So like, whatever. I will play exactly the same. And I just think the idea of having even respawn in your game is something you should float at the table as an option. And I don't think it'll cheapen the game at all. Like, I think it'd even be fun. I like even the idea of like Lancer doing that. If you want to limit respawn, even cooler. Like, your character gets 3 do-overs.
But
like,
okay,
cool
so that's an interesting question then. So if death isn't an endpoint, is there any other endpoint that kind of replaces that, or is it just we're agreeing to play the story to the end or not?
I think you can have the endpoint of we agree to finish the story, like a video game would be. There is the endpoint where, say for example, whoever the antagonist is wins. The endpoint is the party failed in stopping the antagonist's plans in general. Like, they set out and maybe like they lost boss fights, respawned or whatever, and like, oh, they showed up after enough like little respawns or whatever, and oh, hey, that boss is gone. Or they made some very bad decisions out of combat, and plans were set in motion, and okay, boom, the world-ending plot actually went to motion. You lose.
Well, so yeah, I don't think that really answered the question. Do you believe that there should be? Do you believe that there should be endpoints in a campaign that are not just finishing the story?
Yes. That's what I was saying.
Well, no, because you were saying that these are all viable endpoints, but what I'm saying is, if death isn't the option, should there be a way the players can lose?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, but you just said, but everything's available. That's not an answer.
But
the question.
I'm saying that, like, yeah, no, you can lose in ways that aren't just like, oh, you TPK'd, good job, you lose. You can lose by, like, you made poor decisions, your party is too slow to react to things, and oh, now, like, your antagonist just won.
Right. But so, just to be clear, does there have to be that? Does there have to be other ways they can lose? Or is it, is it okay if a game can't be lost in any way?
Yeah, if they want to. The table should figure that out.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, you do you. Everyone at a table should be able to do their own thing. I don't think that's necessarily a healthy thing to do for tabletop gaming in general, because if there's this idea that we're just gonna play the adventure all the way through no matter what, then there is literally nothing you can do to lose the game. Your choices do not matter. It's just maybe how they come about, what character you have at the end. But like, I've definitely in some games been frustrated because it's like, I feel like no matter how I play, it's impossible for me to die or whatever, because no one's willing to like go through with it in the end, and it feels like it takes away any effort that would go into the game, because all effort becomes equal at that point. I
think you gotta have that discussion at the table, of course, and figure out what everyone's investment level wants to be. Like, what do we want the consequences to be? The one bit I always give is the also the level of proficiency at the table, because like that kind of vibe at the table is really good. The one I'm saying of like, the party will win, death doesn't matter, like all the characters will survive, is the exact vibe for none of these people have played a tabletop game before. This is their first one, and the best part about that is none of them will notice, like on the average of like a very casual table of players, because like they just don't know. They're not proficient with like the style usually. Like it just works. The amount of like very casual tables I've sat at where like I've noticed, for example, that like, oh yeah, there's just not a chance that like we're gonna die here. Or like I've been in that room of like, analyze the table. Okay, yeah, we've got this fight in the bag, like because of this. And like I can analyze that moment being proficient, and then the rest of the table is like hand in head. Oh god, we're gonna die. Oh, my character's gonna die. And I'm just like, oh, okay, come on. You're good. Like it just it's the level of like, as you said very early on, cursed with knowledge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's definitely a thing, and like that's kind of like the illusion a lot of tabletop uses, because like I'll admit, most games I've run comes with the expectation that we're going to get to the end of the story, I'm not necessarily going to end you, or have a moment where the game doesn't reach the conclusion. But, unless there's some narrative that comes up that like, we literally had a campaign that had a 50-50 chance of like the party gets TPK'd or not.
Yep. I thought of that immediately when you said out of combat loss. I was like, yeah, like the coin flip.
Yeah. It's just like, because I was like, this character is enigmatic, and I don't know what they're thinking, so I'm gonna flip a coin to see whether you guys die or not, because legitimately, I can't know. This character is much smarter than I am. And
I think importantly, also for people watching, Cam did ask for consent and everyone at the table. Like, this is the options we can have. Either you all just can go free, or I make this. This is more true in character for like what he do in the moment, but I don't feel great about just throwing a 50-50 shot at you to like possibly kill you. What do you guys want to do?
Yeah.
That is how we did it. That's a bunch of, we agreed to the 50-50. So
yeah,
just in case.
But I'll also say there's never been a game I've ever run where loss isn't a possibility.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's something where, like, sure, again, I think whatever you guys want to do at your table is completely fine. But if you can make up an example for any kind of scenario where that's okay. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. I'm talking about for tabletop, for those who enjoy tabletop, you know, for those who actually really like it, really want to get into it, I feel like loss needs to be always a possibility. I don't feel like you should run games where you can't lose, because at that point you guys are just writing a book with just more random generation than it is actually like a game in any form or fashion. You know, like a game is only a game because there are at least some level of stakes, you know, even if it's just winning or losing. It's it doesn't have to be death. I don't think it has to be death. I think you can have different types of win or lose conditions. But I feel like tabletop as a whole has really been made too easy, and not easy. It's not the right way to put it. There's a lot of pride that goes into GMs, which is something I've said I've done plenty of times. GMs knowing what their players can and can't handle, and never throwing anything at them that they are not capable of overcoming. You know, not that I'm saying that you should throw unfair challenges at your players. It's more like there's not enough times GMs are throwing legitimately like, this is a 50-50 encounter. You guys are gonna win or lose based on how you play the game, and not.
Those are like, sometimes the unfair encounters are like, the GM might just, if they're not good at balancing encounters, you should get really experienced with balancing before you start doing the I'm gonna challenge y'all.
Mm-hmm. No, of course.
Throw y'all or something.
Again, we're not talking about like variables. We're just talking about just like the pure principle of it. I genuinely think that tabletop needs to have some level of stakes, because it is a game, and that I think is necessary. But two, narrative gaming becomes more impactful when there are stakes. You know, like we had one of your character deaths, and then we all had to like take a break afterwards because it was kind of emotional, and it was kind of a lot. That's great. That's an experience that you can really only have in tabletop like that, you know, and that's so unique. And the players being able to overcome a challenge or anything like that, it's something that like there's just not. It's not like Dark Souls or Elden Ring or something like that, where the idea of you'll just run it again, you know, is very common. But those games are very, very difficult. And that's like, it's not different in tabletop. Kind of to use your own example, is you guys can just play another campaign, you know? Like, tabletop doesn't end when you lose a campaign, you know? You can just play another one.
Yeah, there's just, that is I guess the lose state for a game like that is you stop playing, and that's the lose state of those kind of video games with respawn mechanics. You just stop playing, because again, I don't know, I at least struggle at the idea of like, because I feel like if you gave examples to a person in games like that, they'd fight back at the idea of being like, hey, I also love the game a lot, and I get a lot out of it, and can hit back with stories of them and their characters having really impactful moments that aren't related to character death. But like, I personally just have that block of like, I don't need character death for me to get something out of, like, I don't need failure states to get something out of a game, because I'm inherently there to tell a good story with my friends and like experience the work my GM has put in. It's like, that's what I care about. Because like, I don't know, that inherently too, like, it's like the idea of I know it's not what you're saying at all for any of it, because I don't think it's what you mean. But like, for some elements of I'm here to experience the narrative. If there's someone who, like, for a campaign that you've put together, and you're like, all right, there's a dragon that's coming down. Come, like, you're gonna go do this, and I'm like, you're just telling me to go kill the dragon. I don't get anything mechanical for doing it. I don't play like that, or I don't even want that to be like a main method of it. However, I'm here for all like that inherent story. I just want to experience all that work that like everyone has put in, especially you. So I love your stories. And like, that is that is inherently what I'm there for, regardless of if you kill me, which you love to do for some reason. I don't know why.
But, well, you know, I think I get what you mean. It's a viewpoint I value, because it's a very, like, it feels like very end user kind of like a kind of view. Like, I care about what I'm getting, and I don't really care about what goes on behind the curtains to kind of get there kind of viewpoint. But I think you would care if anytime you guys rolled, whether you succeeded or failed, you guys succeed the check, right? I'm sure it wouldn't feel great if rolling the dice really didn't matter.
Yeah, if there was never any like skill failures.
Yeah. And
I just don't think a character dying is the same as making a skill failure.
Well, right, we're not talking specifically about character death, but like a skill failure can technically result in you not, you know, like not convincing someone to not press the nuke button that kills everyone, you know?
Yeah, like 100%. It can lead to that.
Like, whether it's death or a skill check, the end results can be the same. It's the point I'm talking about is what makes the game interesting is that your characters are trying to do something, and that there are successes and failures, and failures only matter if there is some kind of fail state for whatever you're doing, you know. Even if it's not campaign ending, there are things that, you know, can end. But if a campaign is ending, you know, I think it's usually because a lot of things have gone very, very terribly. But
true. There's a lot of sequential failures that have occurred. Something very bad has happened.
Right. And I think the thing that you're kind of associating with end states is a thing has gone wrong and thus the game ends. And that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. It's that things can go wrong and the players can get to an end state that is, you know, they didn't do the thing that they set out to do, you know, whether that's through death or some other method.
I mean, the main method I'm picturing it is like a TPK situation, right. Like a fight
Right. Yeah, and I'm
yeah.
not talking about a fight. I'm not talking about like the players make a roll and fuck it up and, you know, the guy presses the nuke button or whatever. I'm just talking about overall there being a end state that isn't, you know, the written story adventure end, you know.
Yeah.
That I think is important to have. And it doesn't have to necessarily be because that's what the players wanted. Like, it can be because roles kept doing wrong, players kept making bad decisions, you know. I don't think any game should end because of I don't even think any game should necessarily end because of one bad combat. That feels bad. But maybe if several things led up to said bad combat, that's a different story. You know, players going into a combat they're obviously not ready for and just expecting that everything is going to be okay is, you know, I think like a valid reason to kind of have a TPK because the players didn't take it seriously and didn't really value what was being done. Like, you also have to remember as well that the GM is doing their best to make a game experience. The GMs aren't handing victories to the players. They're creating challenges for them to overcome. But a challenge is only a challenge because they can fail it, you know. So I understand where you're coming from, that you don't think like a TPK should just end a game. You don't think failing a skill roll should just end a game, but that's not what the argument is.
That's fair. That's how it sounded. Which, to be fair, I guess refining it, I at least think if a better way to phrase what I at least feel is if a failure state, be it however it's handled, a bad sequence of events or a TPK, if it takes like a session to reach like game ending proportion, if that happens and then the GM is like, okay, hey gang, do we want to rewind and do over? I would lose nothing if like, yeah, we could get a little do over from that feels okay. However, if this sequence of events that leads to game failure is multiple sessions, that's a deserved failure state. You kind of earned that. That is very deserved.
You know, I don't even know. I mean, kind of. I think I agree.
There's nuance that can like be very obviously. There's nuance for every situation. Because the reason I immediately am thinking there's a degree is because I immediately am picturing players going, okay, let's keep the fail state campaign. Let's make a new campaign set in the ruined world where the party failed, and then let's try to rebuild, and like now we have a new immediate campaign hook for the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and those games are always fun, you know, where you're seeing the remnants of the previous failed party, or like the party's like, oh, we got the goal, and then something else kind of happened, and you're like, okay, let's clean up the mess of the party that came before. Those games are always kind of cool. Like the evolving world of like each sequential campaign. That's fun. So like those moments, even when like a campaign fails, you can build something very cool out of it. And I at least think like in a shorter period of time, like a 4-hour session, maybe even the failure state happened in like an hour or two. Cause like if it lasted the entire 4-hour sessions of like, that's at least how our sessions last.
Mm-hmm.
Offering to the table, I think is a very fair move if like the party seems very like, kind of bummed about it. Like offering, hey guys, how do we want to roll with this? What do we think the move should be? Do you guys want to like continue with this? Like I have more that I've prepped for everything. Do we want to rewind? Like we could do something different. Like what do we want to do? That is that to me feels like a very fair, like we should read the table and see what everyone wants to go with.
Yeah, I mean, That's I think always an option no matter what the scenario is, you know, even if it is like an earned failure. Uh the table can always decide that. I think that's always probably a possibility. At least hopefully communication is just good at your table.
Good communication.
It's more like I don't know. Maybe it is a thing of like there are people out there who like the illusion of a challenge, you know. They prefer
There definitely are.
Yeah, they prefer the thought of a campaign possibly ending, you know, that kind of that what you were talking about before, that combat that you know you're going to win but everyone else isn't quite so sure, and so they're feeling that stress. And
which is a very new player thing. Like, there's new players freaking out because, oh no, this big boss has a scary move that did damage, and then you're there like yeah, there's action economy and effective damage that's like on the table, and like the math doesn't add up for like him winning, so you gotta calm down. Like,
yeah.
Come on, man.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know that one pretty well, but
yeah,
it's I think it's something where that I think is strictly a that's such a different kind of conclusion, but I guess that's completely fair. The answer, I guess, gets turned into, yes, failure should always be possible, quote unquote, you know, because it's either A, you're someone who prefers challenge and prefers having some level of, you know, like skill involved with how you're running your game, so you don't want the game to be, you know, artificially altered where you just can't lose. But there's also this thing where even for people who think they might want that, actually just want to feel that way and not actually experience it, and that can be something that's even a very conscious desire of like, I want you to challenge me, but I don't want you to necessarily kill my character, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where
I agree with that, like, a lot. Like, because like I, for example, have ran the gambit, obviously, because like I've been in many different games, because Q runs very lethal games. You've ran very lethal games, and then games that are more like lax with that. Like, I am of the opinion that at least you should talk to your table first and foremost. One of the first questions you should ask: how lethal do we want this? Like, what are the level of death and like consequence do we want? And then like work that out, get a entire group consensus, and then at least my personal take then with like my own level of involvement is I will play the exact same way because I don't really care. I will play the same way if I know that my character is going to reach the end of the campaign, and then if I know that he could die, I don't personally care. Sometimes I'm even like, oh god, I hope he does, because if I have to come up with a new character, I'm gonna be sad because I'm gonna be playing the rest of the campaign with a weaker character, and that's gonna suck.
Yeah, well,
that's my character creation process.
I mean, but that's not even necessarily like that's not even necessarily like answering the question, because, you know, like whether you think or whether you are okay with that or not is fine. That, you know, that like that's your own thing. It's more of, are you okay with the GM ensuring you're not going to lose? That's the question.
Probably, if depends on how they're doing it, I guess. Because if it's like them not like, because there's the move that I did personally, which, because I always think it's kind of just rude of like downed in D&D, and then like I downed the party member, cool, and then they immediately start stabbing the person that's downed, like that kind of level. So I'm like, I don't know, I think that would make sense to do in a combat. Is it fun? No, not really. It depends how that would come across in game, because there's the sliding scale to where I'd be like, okay, you can roll back a little bit. You can do that to the other people, but not me. You don't have to worry. That's the most I would probably say if it felt very overt, hand of God, ensuring I succeeded at everything, or if it's just making sure that I don't die in extreme combat. If the latter was happening, I'd probably just shrug and not care.
Well, and again, I'm not necessarily talking about combat.
I know you're not talking about combat. That's why I'm clarifying and giving nuance.
Well, yeah, but you were giving a very combat-y example rather than like, like if the GM is ensuring that that you're going to make it. Like I'm saying right now, your character is going to be there at the end no matter what happens. Are you okay with that?
I would play the exact same.
So
I would not care.
You would not care if the GM was, just decided that you're going to win no matter what.
Not particularly.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't conceivably.
Well, actually, the important question is the group and the GM my friends?
Yes.
Then I would have fun.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't conceivably enjoy that idea too much because if there's no consequence, then there's no free will, That's kind of just a thing. I don't want it to be a thing of like, oh, you failed to convince the Duke to not press the nuclear button in ye old Yorkshire, and he's gonna blow everything up, and he presses the button, and then, oh, dang, a rat just chewed through the wire. Like, obviously, that's very overt, but it's just like, for the sake of example, of you failed every check up until this point, but wait, there's still a chance. It's just like no matter what you do, that feels kind of bad. That feels like, am I just here to help tell your story? Is my input not important to that? Like, it's one thing if that's what you agree as a table to do. And that's, again, whatever a table decides to do, I think is completely fine. But most of the time when you're playing tabletop, you're playing with the idea that your character can die or you can fail skill checks, and that there has to be some kind of failure state kind of intermixed in that. I don't think any group ever has gone into a tabletop with the expectation that they're going to win no matter what. The expectation.
So. No, there's always been that fear of like, oh, my character's gonna die, but yeah, then the GM would do it sneakily. I don't know. It's the idea that like I'm here to tell a story, and then there's a game sliding scale of if it's good or not that is attached. I hope that it's a good game attached, because then it's fun. And it's more fun to tell the story and have conversations in character. And then like there's the idea for me that like, I don't know, the video game I play has an ending cutscene. I'm predetermined to finish the video game I'm playing unless I decide to stop playing the video game.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I don't know. That's the block for me.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, tabletop is not video games. So like, I know we've used that example before, but that's for the people who say death is a necessity, which, it's like, that's not necessarily true.
No, it's not necessarily true at all. It's just that is where like that my brain immediately jumps to the idea of like my connectivity to the concept of failure and death in tabletop, and like what I'm getting out of the game aspect of a tabletop game. I link it to the same level of enjoyment I get out of a video game, like mechanically. And then it's like, I'm like, yeah, well, I don't know. I die in Dark Souls and then I just respawn. So, shrug.
Yeah. I mean, like, a narrative doesn't have that, necessarily. Like, unless it makes sense for the setting, but then there's probably some other kind of failure state then, It's just like, we've gone long over time, and so I think it's an interesting conversation. I think that at the end of the day, I think that the drop the word, I'm so tired. The possibility of failure is important and necessary for tabletop, but whether that is actually like a possibility or it's just the illusion of that possibility, I think can be argued. I think I don't think any group really goes into tabletop with the expectation that they're going to win no matter what, but I feel like a lot of tabletops are going in with the expectation that they are going to succeed, as if they at least try to play the game, and that the GM's not going to throw something that's like too hard at them in particular. And I think it's an interesting perspective to be like, I don't care as long as we're all having fun, because that's true. Yeah, I agree. I think it's always like, if you're having fun, how does it matter that you actually play or not, or anything like that? For me, it's just like, I don't think I can have fun unless there is some possibility of failure, because I want my choices to matter.
Yeah, I mean, those are like the consistent bits, which if you go back throughout the entirety of our tabletop conversations, you will notice that we've both kept to. I don't think these are not surprising takes that Cam and I have shared. It's the important bit. These are conversations of like remnants of bits that we've both had.
It's more like philosophy talk than anything.
Exactly. Yeah. This is like tabletop philosophy talk. Like, my value is very largely, I am a narrative player. If I'm surrounded by my friends and it's fun, like, shrug. I don't care what your table does as long as you're having fun. Like, that is my prevailing value. I cannot be asked to care about like what weird homebrew rule your shit does. Like, go crazy, go stupid, have fun. And like I completely understand the idea of like requiring failure state in a tabletop game. It is strictly that idea of like, I think is an interesting point in a discussion to bring up. I think it's a very like entertaining one. I always like discussing it and hashing it out, because I like hashing out anything that I, as I've said, have a mental block of me like comprehending like why like I don't like feel the same way. Where it's like there's a thing stopping me from like fully agreeing and like feeling the same way. So I want to like hash out the nuance of it.
Yeah.
Like that's fun.
I agree. Like I said, I value your opinions, and I think they give very interesting insights, because I'm someone who very much prides himself on understanding of people or how games work or whatever, especially when it comes to tabletop. It's just something that I very much pride myself on. The ability to kind of like break things down and eventually like get an understanding of it to some degree. And there's just some things that like Alex feels or likes that just seems so not the norm, that it's always interesting to kind of like have these conversations and break it down, because I feel like the way Alex feels, I don't think is necessarily unique or unusual in the tabletop scene. And I feel like having these conversations, especially from a kind of like, I don't know what the perspective would be called. I want to say holistic, but that's not the right word. From a perspective of, I don't care, I'm just here to have fun, I don't care if you're secretly in the background, GM, ensuring we don't lose. If we're all having fun, it doesn't really matter if you're trying that or not, It's a very like, take the philosophy out of a philosophy question and then what do you have kind of moment. And it's always fascinating to be like, okay, so how do we work this out? How do we the math suddenly stopped working, and let's try to figure out why. I think
that nerd. My response to your philosophy is I don't care.
Yeah.
What is your response, Socrates?
Well, because like to some degree
fun.
you do care because you like tabletop and there are things that you do enjoy about it.
I deeply care about it. It's just my care is deeply that the largest amount of people have the most fun possible with the art form, and like enjoy it the deepest. And so, which I mean is actually based on the moral philosophy of, I forget the term for it. It's the moral philosophy of the greatest amount of good going to the greatest amount of people. But it's but take it to a fun aspect of an art form. I just want the most people to like tabletop for the widest amount of reasons. So any practice that is just giving the largest amount of tools, be that safety tools or like mechanical tools or fun tools, like the idea that you had of Path of Exile style, like the end game style for it, I'm like, okay, like logistically making a realistic system for that, nice. If there's a way that could realistically exist, I imagine that'd do very, very well. And if that's like a fun system based, we'd probably get a lot of fun out of that.
Yeah,
I bet we'd all have our favorite like version of that game. Oh no, actually, wait a second. There's the one problem with that game, Cam. I just found it out. Every single person in our friend group would have their own favorite version of it, and we'd all fight over which version of the game to use.
Well, that's not necessarily how that would work, because it's modular. It's based on what player is interacting with what thing,
But a player is like, I want to do the intense crafting thing, and then they're like, intense crafting, I want to do this mechanic, and they're like, that mechanic. Oh no, that could be bad.
I mean,
that'd be more funny. I think it'd be hilarious.
It would just be a thing of like, can't you just make a dice roll to have this conversation? Do we have to get into social combat for this particular moment kind of thing?
Because you picked this version of the plug and play like tabletop game. That's what I picture. It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle like tabletop game where you plug in different like supplement rules.
Yeah, but like the point of it would be the player interacts with the parts they like, not the whole party interacts with the parts that every player wants. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that I picture it like, you have like the core block that is your that is like the base game, and then you like plug in all of the other rules that like the player wants to interact with.
Yeah.
And like what they find fun. And then every player's gonna have a different interaction. And I think it'd be really funny if they're like, my version, you just make a dice roll for this, you nerd. You have to like make 20 and you're like going in depth. And they're like, yeah, but I'm getting this cool effect out of it. And they're like, is it even worth it? I'm gonna do this mechanic for magical like spell sculpting. And they're like, that looks so dumb. Like, God, that sounds hilarious. I'm into it. I'm sold. I was already sold, but I'm sold more because I'm picturing people being funny and like fighting about it.
Being these weird Muppets, having these strange scenarios.
I made up people to make fun of, and so I'm more into it.
Also,
I made up
fake
NPCs to bully, so I'm more engaged.
But it might be a bot. Who knows?
It is.
Okay. Well, then, fuck you, Cashin. God, I had a point. I'm trying to wrap things up. It was a good point. What was it? It was based on it was a thing of like, we already have this with this whole plug and play thing. Oh, yes, I remember now. You know what's funny is we kind of already opt into plug and play in a way by just removing rules we don't like, because, you know, technically speaking, Pathfinder has a variety of rules that we choose to ignore in our games. So
yes, that's plug and play in reverse, though.
Yeah.
That's remove and play. Like, we gotta have plug and play.
But that's the important part about the modular style of, it can be for the players who want to interact with said thing, and can be ignored for the players who don't want to interact with said thing.
Yeah. Like, I agree. Like, it's a similar concept, 100%. We just got to reverse it and then have the system that I'm envisioning that lets me make fun of fake people that I'm making up in my head because I find it funny, personally.
But, yeah. Anyway, I guess we just decided to spend an extra hour on a conversation totally irrelevant to today's topic.
I released a video today. I don't have much else to do other than we're gonna make dinner at some point soon.
Yeah, so. Well, I am going on 23 hours of being awake, so.
Oh yeah, you should.
I will probably be going
get
to
off
bed
and
soon.
You should go to sleep.
Yeah.
You should go to sleep after this.
Yeah. Too much Path of Exile. Honestly, it's mostly just I had a very like nighttime schedule lately, and I've been trying to work my way back around. And
yeah, you should fix that.
Yeah, I will. But that's gonna be it for us. Thank you all so much for watching. Is there anything you want to leave us with, Alex, before we head out?
Yeah, I just released a video today, as I kind of just said. I've been on a bit of a Warhammer 40k Xenos kick, and if you want to cover and come over and go check out Warhammer 40k lore, that's what I cover on Glue Boy, my YouTube channel. It's linked in Cam's YouTube. Talk about many different tabletop lore, like Vampire the Masquerade, Trench Crusade, all that stuff. I made a video on the Tau and their many different auxiliary Xenos, like allied Xenos units. The most fun part about the faction, to be honest. Go check it out. It came out. I'm honestly happy about it. I just made a goofy video with a very goofy tone. So yeah, feel free to go give it a watch.
And as for me, we had this playtest kind of jump up out of nowhere. I thought I was kind of done and I could do whatever, but I had a couple more things, but we're done with it. I think the classes are very interesting. I'm very excited to see the book they come out in, and you know what that is. Unfortunately, we are ending this year kind of not near my goal. We're gonna be about like 1.6k shy of 10k, what I was aiming for. But you know, it happens. And honestly, this was kind of within the range of my expectations anyway. We're still doing really great on the channel. There's a lot of things coming out next year. So if for whatever reason we don't see any of you because of the holidays or whatever, hope we all have a good year. Great Christmas, happy holidays, whatever you celebrate. And I'll be doing a few more videos, and then we'll probably be going break on the channels in early January, as my daughter will be born in like mid-January, so we'll be getting a bunch of things ready, and I'll be taking some time away from YouTube and the like and streaming. But so you know, hopefully at the very least we'll have a few more videos before that time comes, and then we'll be welcoming in a new year with a lot of new things, a baby included. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and say goodnight.
Good night.
Good night.